Hello, Jeff Zwarenk, and welcome again to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas and see how they relate to the truth of Christianity. Today, I'm joined by Anjeanette Roberts, and we are going to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic and ask the question, is God responsible for it? AJ, it's good to have you here today.
Thanks, Jeff. It's really good to be here. Well, I was going to say here with you, but I'm not here with you. I'm here and you're there. So anyway,
we'll do things remotely and have a good conversation. So it just kind of naturally flows out of this. God's all good, all loving, all caring, all powerful. Viruses seem to be destructive and bad. So, I mean, is it the case that God created these viruses?
You know, Jeff, it's amazing to me because I've learned so much over the last few years. But, most viruses, the vast majority of viruses aren't associated with any kind of disease. And yet the ones that we tend to focus on and the ones that we're aware of the most are those that are associated disease because they capture our attention and we go in and we ask what's causing the disease and we discover it's a virus, right? So, but there are many more viruses, and I really can't emphasize the word many enough times. And the vast majority of them are playing a critical role in maintaining ecological balance to sustain complex life on Earth. The vast majority of viruses infect bacteria, and they're actually keeping bacteria in check so that other organisms can thrive. If it weren't for the vast majority of viruses, Earth would be sort of overrun with bacteria. And so I see viruses on the whole as a part of God's very good creation.
So it seems like, or if I get what you're saying, there are some viruses that cause diseases, and we are particularly sensitive to those because those are the ones that impact us, if you will. But there's a lot. And I think you've gone so far as to say there are more viruses than stars in the universe or something. There's an enormous number of viruses.
That's right. There's about 10,000 times more viruses on planet Earth than there are stars, estimated stars in the entire universe. And so that's a lot of viruses. And if it wasn't for the vast majority of those, again, sort of Earth would just be overrun by bacteria. And yet you're right, we're most sensitive to, but also most aware of those associated with disease. And so that's why our perception of what viruses are doing for us and around us is skewed because of our ability to observe only the ones that cause disease.
But that seems to be kind of a similar thing with bacteria. I mean, I know we've got antibacterial soaps and their bacteria seem to cause a lot of diseases, but now there seems to be this general recognition that there's good bacteria and bad bacteria. Is it a similar thing with viruses here, I would presume?
Yeah, I would say that our knowledge of good bacteria and bad bacteria have been around for decades, right? We've known that bacteria are critical primary producers. They're able to take inorganic compounds and synthesize those into organic compounds that the rest of life depend upon. They're also able to decompose living organisms to sort of keep recycling the ecological system. Certainly, we've known about probiotics for a very long time as well, taking bacteria for healthy reasons, health maintenance reasons. And now we're learning a lot about the gut microbiome and the effects that bacteria can have on our health in other ways that we didn't imagine before. So yes, we're learning that the vast majority of bacteria, again, are critical for sustaining all life on planet Earth and especially our life as well.
So if we have this scenario now where God's created viruses and at least the bulk of the time they're doing things to maintain and keep creation habitable for complex organisms like humans, if you will, how do we reconcile God's goodness with the destruction that we see coming from this pandemic?
I think that the viruses that impact our human health, they're primarily entering the human population because of our lack of knowledge of ecology. And even when we have knowledge, our lack of acting on the knowledge that we have in appropriate and responsible ways. And so it's really what I consider human mismanagement of creation that puts us into contact with animals or puts animals in contact with other animals that nature wouldn't normally have these different types of organisms in an overlap pattern. And so we wouldn't actually see what are called trans-species jumps of a virus that normally infects bats, jumping into an intermediate host and then into the human population and causing diseases such as SARS-2 or COVID. SARS-2 is the virus that is responsible for COVID, or SARS, the original, or rabies or Ebola. All of these viruses almost certainly originated in history in bats, and then jumped into other animals, and then into the human population.
So, this in a very real sense, or at least part of the argument you're making, is that God has created this thing that is doing a very good function, but through our mismanagement of creation in some fashion, we've allowed things to happen that wouldn't normally happen, by intent or by neglect or ignorance, if you will. How would you sort that last question out?
Yeah, so is the responsibility ours because of neglect or intent or ignorance? I guess in some respects, I would say probably due to a lack of attention and or a lack of motivation to act on what we know. And so sometimes our judgments get clouded because of convenience or because of monetary gain or wanting to maintain monetary flow. So the markets where many of these viruses are passed from the harboring animal in nature into an intermediate animal into humans, we know these risks. We've known of risks like the one that we're suffering right now since as early as 2003, when the first SARS epidemic or pandemic began. It wasn't as widespread as this one, but we've known again since 2012 that these same types of viruses, coronaviruses, can leap from bats into camels into humans and cause MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And so we're aware of these risks, and yet we don't manage the markets where these animals come in contact with each other, or where humans come in contact with animals in a way that helps prevent either animals that shouldn't be that closely caged to one another or coming in human contact. We fail to prevent those types of things from happening. And we also fail to prevent sort of dissemination of knowledge quickly enough so that on a global scale we can react when we start to see one of these pandemics begin to emerge.
I really appreciate your comments, AJ, and I think you just highlight an important point that there's an aspect of creation that's not particularly safe that God has put in there, or that has the capacity for damage, but our actions impact whether that causes the damage. I mean, if you go play around a lion, you're probably going to get eaten if you do that too long, but that doesn't mean the lion is bad in that sense.
That's right. And who knows if all of these viruses are actually serving a good purpose in nature? That's sort of another one of those questions that we need to go out there and look at more closely, although safely, because of the risks associated with human exposure to some of them.
Thanks, AJ. I appreciate your comments. When we look at viruses, they seem to be kind of this double-edged sword. They have the capacity and they're integral in keeping creation habitable for humanity and other large creatures. But they also have this capacity to do a great amount of harm. And I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and check out AJ's blog on this topic. It's called COVID Pandemic, God's Fault or Ours. It will give you great tools to see exactly how viruses are designed and how God uses them, but also how, as humans, we are responsible for managing this beautiful creation that God has given us to live in. Go check out that blog, get the tools to be equipped so that you can go out and share God's love and purpose and value for all those around you.